Okay. So thanks, Heather, for the introduction and the questions about certification beforehand. My name is Joy Kirkpatrick, and I am the Farm Succession Outreach Specialist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. And today I'm going to talk about the messy middle of farm succession and give some ideas of some tools or some facilitation techniques to help people navigate some of those areas. I will say that I've been kind of reading about some different group decision making. I've taken some training and been listening to a lot of different podcasts. So this is sort of a mashup of all those. And I have been using this concept with the farm families that I've been working with, and it seems to resonate with them when they realize that they've got a name to kind of use, a word or a phrase to use about kind of where they are, so that they don't feel maybe quite as, I don't know, we'll get into that. So this is who I am, and we'll go to the next slide. So as I said, I'm gonna introduce the concept of the messy middle, and then have some facilitation ideas. And I would love to have this be more of a conversation rather than a lecture if possible. So feel free to put things into the chat, or unmute and ask a question, or give some sort of feedback of what you've seen when you've worked with families too. So I would really appreciate that. So as I told Heather, this is only 14 slides, so we'll see how long this takes us to get through it. So my question to you guys, and this is where I would like you to have it to be interactive. When you're working with farm families or farm businesses on succession planning, how would you describe the attitudes or emotions of your typical farm members to the words farm succession planning?
Confusion.
Confusion.
Naughty.
Naughty?
No, Knotty.
Oh, thank you. Naughty. Oh, Lucy says dread. Oh, defiance.
I would say nervous laughter about the complexity.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Colette.
Let the kids worry about it.
Oh, let the kids worry about it.
Yeah.
Uncertain where to start. Concerned.
Overwhelmed is a good one. I see that down there in the chat.
Yeah.
And they just don't want to deal with it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think, from my end, everyone, I try to make it a little easier on them, because nobody likes thinking about the end of their life. And so, I try to bring a little bit of humor into it, but it's a little difficult.
Yeah, I'm trying to bring some levity to that, right? Confusion, reserved. I think that's a good word, and isolated. Yeah, I think people maybe don't realize how common their attitudes and emotions are about that. Thank you for that interaction. Avoidance and protective. Yeah, I agree. So you guys have all, given great words or phrases. In some ways, I have felt like I could even use the word sometimes with farm families: excited, hopeful, or motivated. But overall, I think the words that you guys have put into the chat or expressed are maybe a little bit more of what we see. So when I talk to farms, transferring the assets and management of the farm business is what I call kind of big change. And it can be exciting to think about the business continuing to the next generation, and even good things are stressful. I think that was a word that I saw in the chat as well, when there's sort of that big change connected to it. And we know that these kind of changes, this is not going to happen overnight. And it's going to involve making space for new goals, visions, and ideas. I think we've all worked with farm families and farm family members or farm members when they've first recognized the need to talk about succession planning. And I think there is maybe that little bit of motivation and excited to get started, and maybe even a bit relieved, because it's like they felt like that succession planning was sort of the elephant in the room, but having that first conversation, you can kind of feel like, okay, we've at least started it and it's out on the table, right? But then the farm members or the farm family get to that place where they might face some of those tension points. I've talked before about the tensions in farm succession from some of that research from Pennsylvania. And we've done some research here in Wisconsin on that too. So it might be that financial capacity of the business, right? They're not quite sure, can they bring another farm person onto the farm, or of that, perennial balance of those inheritances. Is that fair versus equal conversation needs to be discussed. Or it might be that the successor generation wants to bring in their own ideas and management ideas and opinions to the table. And then this is where the farm members, they can, what I use the word is start to feel a bit unsettled, right? They can't keep moving forward on a linear path to an immediate decision. And so for so many of them, they're so used to having an issue or a problem or something that needs to be addressed, and they kind of can see a linear path to answer those questions. But when you bring other humans and emotion to it, it's not quite as linear as we might want it to be. So thinking about, we've opened up that conversation and we've sort of recognized that elephant in the room. But then when those tension points start kind of coming to light, not only is the elephant in the room, it's been given a place at the table, right? Because you've kind of opened up that, and I'm going to be mixing up all of my metaphors, that can of worms, right? So you got the elephant in the room at the table, and then you've opened that up. So what I've been reading about and researching a little bit, I will say that, so a few years ago, I took a training that, and Nathan, I don't know if you're able to travel to Madison enough, but there was a training called Facilitating by Heart. That would be something that would be a fantastic training, I think, for the work that we do around succession planning. And it's through the continuing studies at Madison, and they might have a virtual version for that now after the pandemic. So that class introduced me to the Kainer work, Sam Kainer's work of the Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making. So this whole idea of how do you bring a group of people together and start making decisions together in a way that's really effective and gets you where you want to be. So that is this sort of this diamond model of participation. We'll talk a little bit about it as we move through this slide. But the other pieces that I listen to a lot of Brene Brown, I don't know if you guys know her, but Dare to Lead is one that is a good book that she has out. She's got a lot of different research, and all of her work is very much centered in qualitative research. So she talked about this term that she called the messy middle. And she talks about it in terms of maybe where you are at a place where the middle of an experience where things get rocky or we hit a wall. She compares it to a 3-day conference, right? Day one is all excitement about new ideas and concepts and new possibilities, which is kind of where we are with the farm family when they've finally taken that first step to have that conversation. And then day two is sort of the, oh crap, how is this actually going to work in reality? Or realizing they have a lot more work to do, a lot more conversations to have. But we need day two. We need that unsettled, that kind of don't know where we are, day two to get to the day three. So when we think about it in regards to the group decision-making, Sam Kainer and his colleagues call it that grown zone. So you'll see in the middle of this this diamond, they call this the diamond model of participation. So over here on the left side, you've got, and I've got different things, right? I'm talking about transition, or maybe it's not even the big change of transition, but there's an issue or a problem that's on the farm that needs to be addressed. And now the blue dots, right, are where familiar ideas or opinions are coming, are there, right? So maybe that's in our plans of when we work with farms, that's maybe the owner generation kind of thinking about the things that they would normally do. But if you've got that next generation, these pink asterisks are actually, you know, those are the new ideas or new opinions from maybe that next generation, right? So then while you're trying to get, you know, a farm to start bringing in all those ideas and trying to bring that successors in, ideas in, that's where you get into that grown zone or that messy middle, right? Like, how do you start taking those opinions and building them into something? And for farm families and farm businesses that have only been able to, you know, maybe that owner generation's been farming, maybe it's a spouses working together for decades, right? And they're the only two that have to like make a decision, thinking about how do you start making that, having that decision making way more transparent and bringing in those ideas. So when we think about that, this messy middle or the grown zone, and then if we go over, so if we get through the messy middle, we'll talk about how you get through that messy middle. But then on the right side, so what they call this left side from the question mark over, this is like divergent thinking, right? So you're kind of like going separate ways because you're divergent thinking. Everybody has different ideas. And then you've got it all mixed up in that grown zone or the messy middle. But then how do you get it to a point where it's what we call on the right side of it is convergent thinking, right? It's a mix of ideas that come from the familiar and the new, and how do you refine those ideas finally to get to a point where you make a decision or have a solution to your issue or problem, or have a plan or have an answer to your question. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but some ideas about that. So the messy middle, when we talk about it that way, it sounds like something nobody wants to go through, right? This is the point where the farms might stall out and perhaps drop the discussion. They may, you know, in terms of how sometimes we work with, they might ghost you, right? They stop returning your calls or your emails. And it's where farms may want to stay in their comfort zones, right? They might kind of like shift back over to that left side of this diagram and kind of just pick out those blue opinions and familiar ideas, and have those manage it in the familiar way of the past. So the question is, how can we gently challenge them to stick with the process and sit with this uncomfortableness or this unsettledness? Our role as someone outside of the business and family is to help them kind of move through this messy middle, where I feel like deeper conversations, mutual understanding of the needs of the farm and family members can be discovered. And I think that's, we'll talk a little bit more about the needs versus the solution. So mutual understanding can lead them out of the messy middle and into the right side of the drawing, where the best of all ideas and opinions are examined, and then you decide which one or which combinations of them would best address the issue or the stressor or whatever it is that you're trying to address. And then when that's done, what I call like the fun part, right, is where the planning and the action steps and acting on those decisions can happen. But if you try to avoid the messy middle, you risk leaving great ideas on the table unexamined, and you risk leaving key people out of the decision-making process, right? That is that whole idea of bringing that next generation into that process. So, yep, there's my divergent zone and there's the convergent zone. So, so what do we say when a farm finds itself in the messy middle, right? I've actually started kind of like giving them those words to say, I feel like, you guys might kind of be in this messy middle. And I talk about like what that means. It's like you've come to a place where something may be either your ideas, right? Those different colored dots in the asterisks are kind of coming together and conflicting, or you've come to the time where you've got to start talking about fair versus equal, or other things that are the family has not wanted to talk about, right? It could be a lot of things that, at least in the farm succession concept, I'm kind of being sort of broad about what that messy middle could be. So I've been giving them, say, like, I feel like this might be where you are. You might be in this messy middle. And I say, that's, now you can name it, right? And just think about really encouraging them to resist the urge to go back to the left side or back to the familiar and pick an idea because that feels comfortable. And the other thing that I encourage them, like, resist the urge of just skipping over the messy middle and going right over to that, like, action planning, right? You've maybe picked an idea and boom, you go over to the other side. So you really have to that's the facilitator's role of sort of like making that space for the grown zone and helping them feel comfortable with that, right? So resisting the urge to skip over the messy middle and think you can fast forward through the process. You might get a plan, but is it really going to be a sustainable plan, right? So while it can be frustrating, you can also say, well, it might be frustrating not to have a linear path to a decision or a solution. Taking the time to really dive into the messy middle can develop a more resilient solution, right? I've seen so many times that farms who haven't taken that time and space and energy to investigate those things that they are uncomfortable kind of addressing, so they'll go right on to their attorney and get a plan together, and then that's when they come back. When it starts not working, then they come to us and like, okay, how do we fix this, right? So if we can take that space and investigate that messy middle now, I think it would be a more resilient plan. So now I'm going to stop there and see if anybody has any comments. I'm going to go back to that slide there. Anybody has any comments or thoughts about this idea of either using the term the grown zone or the messy middle? I kind of like the messy middle term a little bit better, but it kind of means the same thing. I'm going to pause.
This is Lori Shipman. I think this is a wonderful way to illustrate it. We all kind of know it happens, but having this in front of us, maybe when we're speaking to farm families, might give them a little better view of what's ahead when we start talking about it. And you're so true. The grown zone, the messy middle is a lot of times when you get ghosted and you wonder if you've just totally lost it with them or if they'll continue. Sometimes it takes quite a length of time before they will get back with you.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Anybody else have any comments? Any other things? Like I hit on the financial capacity and the fair versus equal. Does anybody, now that we've kind of opened up this concept and this idea, are there other things that you think can maybe emotional or maybe something that you've seen that has ended up being someone's messy middle? Okay, I'm missing some messages here. Heidi, the question about getting this illustration sent to us, I am in the process of putting this sort of concept in as a website article for our website. And so I'll be able to send a link that'll have this image in it soon. So it will be available in probably the next week or so. Anybody else have a messy middle? A farm that has an unusual messy middle?
I guess one of the things that I see is that sometimes the succession planning of the operation is going okay, but the land is in the messy middle. So they're getting their plan for the business, but the land is just really not addressed.
Like who's eventually going to own it or how it's
going to own it, how that's going to work. And so we just had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with a number of producers, and, you know, the ones that were successful in succession planning, nobody could talk about the land.
Mm. So they've got the operational, they've been successful in transferring the sort of the operational piece is kind of what you mean, Colette, right? Yeah. Right. But nobody's touched the land conversation.
Right. The land is still not, doesn't have a plan yet.
High value, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the biggest groan zone lately has been, how are we going to pay each family member that's involved? You know, wages or salary, or what's the compensation look like when, you know, it's always been mom and dad's and they just use the checking account, and when there's money in it you buy groceries. But figuring out how you're going to pay the kid that's coming in to ensure that they're getting a wage or salary as well becomes that part. They're like, we'll just figure that out as we go, which doesn't always go so swell.
Yeah. I have a messy middle one right now where they have a couple of different enterprises and one son's getting paid out of the enterprise that he's doing nothing for. So it's like, okay, that's something that maybe we should clean up a little bit here. So how do we keep a meeting together during this messy middle rather than just working or going back to like doing things there, just the regular work? Yeah. Non-farm siblings, particularly land also. Yeah. Thanks. So I am going to say that I have been introducing this messy middle concept to the farms, and I feel like that is something that gives them a way to acknowledge how they're feeling and where we are. And it also helps them realize that if we've thought about this enough and worked with enough farms, that we've given this a term, that they are not the only ones dealing with this, right? So I think that's the thing. It's like, okay, yeah, messy middle is just something that every farm deals. I mean, every family, every business, it doesn't matter if they're a farm or not, right? They get to a place where when they have a group decision to make, it can get really messy. So we've talked about like acknowledge it. You have a name for it now. Resist the urge to go back. Don't skip over it. One thing, so here's where I'm getting some ideas to help you facilitate through the messy middle. And right now, I'm gonna, for these next few slides, I'm going from the left side of that visual that I shared with you over to the right side. So something that I've been doing in some of my planning workshops, my farm stress workshops, as well as farm succession, is having people write a motivation statement. Why are they motivated and committed to getting a plan in place? Or what are their reasons for the farm stress things? It's not always succession planning, but it's like whatever it is they've identified as their stressor. What is it that they want? What's motivating them to do that, right? So then if we can get them to write that, which surprisingly, I've gotten people to do that, write them and then keep that in like their folder or their notebook or whatever it is. And then when we get to a part where it feels a little like a messy middle, I ask them to refer to that. Now, if they're comfortable enough that not only are they writing that motivation statement for themselves, but they're comfortable enough to share that out with their farm partners, that's even better, right? So that everybody kind of knows what the motivation is. But maybe it's just their own, maybe they keep it for their personal thing, but I ask them to sort of go back to that, right?
Can you say again the exact question you're asking? Because that just sounds like gold. So can you rephrase it so I can remember?
What motivates them to address this issue, right? Like their stressor, what is motivating? What is it going to do for them and their farm and their family if they get this solved? How's it going to feel? What's their motivation to continuing with this process? I have a worksheet for that. You'll find out that I have a worksheet for everything. I can send that out too.
Yeah, I've got a family right now that I want to send it to before our meeting next week. So
okay. All right. I'm going to make that on my list too. Here, Mary.
So often we get the younger generation who is now in their 30s or 40s or even 50s, and no succession plan has been developed. They're very motivated, but the older generation is not. How do we get them to write a motivation statement?
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons they're maybe not as motivated, right? There's either, it could be that they're too dependent, they're like nervous or feel it very risky if they're super dependent on the farm assets for their retirement. There could be because they're just so used to making all the decisions, they're not really want to give up control. And then the other thing is, I think a lot of that resistance, and this one is something that's really harder to peel back, but if you can again, it's like if we can start using these words and these terms and these concepts with our farm families, it's like normalizes it, right? And one of them is their fear of what are they if they're not the farmer, right? Like what's their role? Who are they? They're in their own minds. Who are they if they're not the farmer making the decision? So I think that if you can, for that owner generation, sometimes, and this comes from, I can't remember her name, but she was working with Practical Farmers of Iowa. Shoot, I wish I could remember her name. She talks about writing a legacy letter. And maybe that would resonate more as a term with that owner generation than a motivation sort of statement, right? What is it that they would like, to see happen? What is their legacy going to be, and what does that look like? So maybe using that word instead of motivation. So this is something like, so maybe if you're having the owner generation write sort of a legacy statement or a legacy letter, those are the things like when you hit this place, ask them to like review those, go back and look at those. And it's not something that I necessarily have them share with me. This is just for them. The other thing that I have them do is, and this is kind of goes back to our tenets of the coordinator training for those of you who have taken this training. And Heather, I'm realizing there are chats that I've not looked at. So if you can just monitor those for me. The definition of the situation, right? When you think about, we talk about that in the training, where's the farm now? And then defining the challenge or issue from many perspectives. So really, like, again, we're still over on that left side of that diamond, and we're over there on that left side. And the question is, what is the challenge or issue from many perspectives? And if you guys remember from I'm just going to share this from your manual, coordinator training manual, if you guys have been a coordinator, when we're looking at this, it's like, this is where we are defining the situation from a different perspective, right? Asking these questions of financial, social, legal perspective, a personal perspective. Are there other, perspectives? Maybe we need to bring in the in-laws perspectives. Some people don't like that, but if that's the thing, that's the elephant in the room, let's get that perspective out on the table. So thinking about defining the situation more clearly than maybe we thought we had, right, when we got started with this farm, but maybe we need to go back and make sure that we define that again. And then here's where these are more sort of the values from that. This is from the Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making. 4 values that I think we as coordinators really need to kind of keep in mind and make sure that we're doing our job, right? Trying to encourage full participation, find mutual understanding, accept the legitimacy of one another's needs and goals, right? Don't be dismissive of someone's needs and goals. We have to kind of suspend judgment, and encourage the rest of the group to also do that as well. Find inclusive solutions, and then support that shared responsibility for designing and implementing a process to achieve a solid plan. So really trying to, those are sort of like our values as a facilitator, a coordinator that we need to have. So those, as I said, those previous ideas are kind of over here on that left side. So motivation statement, defining the issue, and then the 4 values are kind of on those left side. Those are ways that to help everyone clearly define the issue and start with those 4 values of shared decision making. The next ideas I'm sharing are more for that, what we would call that divergent zone, right? Where you're trying to elicit ideas from the entire group. And I'm just gonna throw out some ideas. If other people have some great ideas of what you use for this particular time, we'd love to hear them. And like I said, this is a concept that I'm still kind of building around. So I'm trying to find things for each of the zones. One thing I think about is like brainstorming, like actual brainstorming where people don't respond and say, that'll never work, right after somebody said something. So it's one of those where it's actual brainstorming where nobody responds because you have to get all of those out on the table. A SWOT analysis, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats might be helpful in that area to really, that's maybe also a little bit more of that defining piece of defining the situation. The worksheets in the workbook that I use a lot at this particular time is the visioning exercise, right? Where do they see themselves in 3 and 5 years? Where do they see the business in 3 to 5 years? And then intentions and goals worksheet also from the workbook. So really getting an idea of what people are, what their goals are. And then also those open-ended questions. Some of those could be, how do you see the situation? How do you picture this? What tells you this is the way to go? If you start asking questions about some of those options, how does this sound to you? Trying to elicit some of the maybe feedback from others who haven't talked as much. What feelings do you have about the situation? And then like what actions are warranted here? In this particular area, I think that what I think about is the facilitator should, as I said, encourage full participation, gather many perspectives, and try to suspend judgment. I think we all sometimes find ourselves like kind of knowing where things need to go because we've been around and had these conversations with a lot of farms, but we really need to step back and make sure that it's that group decision making that's happening. Okay, so going to the reframing, or to the grown zone. So thinking about reframing it, right? Thinking about this is how you're stating the problem. Is there a way to reframe that and flip it, right? Maybe it sounds negative. Maybe you flip it so it sounds positive, just to see how it feels like to do that reframing. We need to check assumptions. And then here's where I want to talk about backup from solutions to needs. So with farms, one in particular I'm working with right now, I have someone who's very motivated, maybe more so than the rest of the group, right? And that particular farm member already has an idea, has written it out, like basically jumped right on over that grown zone in the messy middle and said, this is what we need to do. But then we have other people in that same farm saying, no, this is the direction we need to go. So they're all talking about solutions, but if you can ask them what needs they have that are going to be met with that solution, what need is it? So then if we look at needs, they might have some common needs. And then that's when we can maybe pick and choose from the different solutions and options because that also helps us build criteria, which is like that next step. So thinking about like asking what needs that solution addresses for them would be the question, the way I would ask that question. From the workbook, I would use the core values exercise and then fair versus equal conversation. When you find yourself as a facilitator in this, we've already talked about like normalize the struggle to integrate perspectives, right? Normalize this messy middle, promote mutual understanding and help people hang in there, right? This is where it's like, this is going to feel uncomfortable and let's try to sit with that. So then for that right side where you're kind of going into that convergent thinking, this is where you're kind of like listing all of the ideas, establishing criteria, right? If we use the needs, if we figure out what the needs are, maybe we can establish a criteria of like, what does the solution have to do, right? It needs to provide money for that owner generation to age gracefully. Maybe that's an established. And then what does age gracefully mean, right? It's like you're establishing a specific criteria to know if these solutions kind of match up with that. This might be where you start finding dot voting. Like if you've got a big enough group of people in the farm, trying to figure out which idea seems to have the most backing behind it. Gradients of agreement is something that I like to use rather than just a yes, no vote. Like that's, yes, no. You have like a gradients of agreement from like 1 to 5, and 1's a hell no and a 5 is absolutely yes kind of thing, and see where they fall with this option, this idea. And if they are at a 3 or 4, like what would you ask the question, what would it take you to get to a 4 or 5, right? Like, so it gives them an opportunity to finesse or refine an idea without just saying yes or no to it. Because you're not, if everybody keeps saying yes or no to each other's ideas, you're never going to like move that needle. And then this is where you also can get into that SMART goals and action planning. Those are just really quick ideas. These are the references. I will share the PowerPoint as a PDF with Heather, or we'll get it uploaded. Maybe we can upload it as a piece when we get it up on the website as well. We can have the PDF attached to that. And I will stop there.